Phyllis's next guest is author, guide, and spiritual leader Deborah Roth. She is the founder of Spirited Living and known for her work as an interfaith minister, leading unique and creative wedding ceremonies. Deborah also helps people build nurturing relationships and coaches many others through life's transitions. She's the host of the popular video series, Embodying Your Divinely Feminine Wisdom. You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
You have a wonderful group of people who love what you do. And what I would like to share with the audience is your reason for being. What is it that you do from your perspective? How would you describe your work?
So I would say my reason for being is, and it really is captured by the name of my business, which is Spirited Living. And I grabbed that way back in the late 90s when you could still get really cool names, domain names. And it's just everything that I do fits under that umbrella. And I think even recently, I've gone so far as to say that there's and I just did a video about this on my YouTube channel, and it'll be on my website when I finally get it updated. That the kind of the trunk, so the roots are spirited living, and everything comes out of that, helping people to create lives and relationships, whatever it is that they're looking to improve, to enhance, to deepen, making sure that they're keeping their mind, body, spirit connection flowing. And then what I've really come over the last many years to realize is that so much of what I do is very obviously about what I call the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, the positive feminine, however you want to call that. And it's not, as I often say, this is not gender specific. The qualities of the divine feminine, I truly believe, and if there's a larger mission in the world that I have in the world, I would say it has to do with encouraging people everywhere to embrace the qualities of collaboration, of cooperation, honoring our intuition, honoring our emotions and our vulnerability, our connection to nature, our honoring our bodies, celebrating our bodies, which, yes, I work with all kinds of people, but I would say the majority of the people I work with are women, or at least people who subscribe to all of those and really embrace all of those, what I call divinely feminine qualities. And they show up in all the different branches of my spirited living tree.
Well, that describes the outer framework. Let's see if we can go deeper inside the framework. So you talk about the spirit and body connection, the mind-body connection. Now, it's been used a lot in our world. It's been said a lot. What does Deborah Roth mean by that?
So that's a good question. I would say for me, it is very much everything that I do, at least I like to think I do, is coming back to the wisdom of our body. And when I, as a coach, if I refer people to therapists, all the therapists that I refer people to are body-oriented therapists, either Gestalt therapists or SE, somatic experience therapists, because I really do believe that, we're such a mental society. We're very heady. We're very left-brained in a lot of ways. I think, you know about Dan Pink's work, who talks about the importance and nowadays of balancing the left brain and the right brain. And I think that's often where we find, the what we typically call masculine qualities or feminine qualities. And we need both sides. I mean, the divinely feminine or the feminine qualities really reside kind of most typically in the right brain, which governs our creativity, our emotions, our intuition, many of those things that I just defined. Left-brained is our more linear, rational, strategic side. We need them both. We'd never get anything done if we didn't have, if we weren't honoring our left brain qualities. At the same time, though, I think what's happened in our current culture is that we get stuck And the whole mind body thing, I think, I don't want to reduce it to something as simplistic as this, but mental, being stuck in your mind, is a downside of too much left brain emphasis. We, like I said, we need to be rational. We can't just go off in la la land and think we're going to get anything done. But where I think we need to bring the balance back is honoring that our intuition and our gut responses to things. Not everything that we do or see is necessarily going to have a rational explanation. And in fact, that's what creativity is about. You talk to any artist or writer, and they talk about their flashes of insight, these things that come out of left field. And unless we keep ourselves open, yes, you could say that's a mental thing. So it is being open-minded, open-hearted, and I think through that sort of combination, holding that in your body as well, and keeping, which was a hard thing to do for a lot of us during the height of the pandemic, holding that and keeping our body moving and being embodied. It's a thing that comes up not just in the people that I recommend to body-oriented therapists, but in lots of the other work that I do too.
Well, I've been in workshops where you've been in the front of the room and you've led people in physical exercises. Does this in any way help the spiritual being as well as the physical being?
Oh, totally. And I think it's funny, I just, right before we got in this interview, Phyllis, I was responding to one of my wonderful clients who is a retired CEO, and he very, very spiritually based. And I introduced him to Julian of Norwich. Julian of Norwich was a mystic that lived in the 13th, 14th century. And she was kind of a rock star mystic. I mean, she traveled around the country teaching about her spiritual visions. And she had an entourage, all of men, of course. And remember, we're talking the Middle Ages. So for a woman to have that kind of notoriety and respect was kind of amazing. And she created something called body prayer that I've introduced to a lot of my clients, for any of the groups that I'm part of. And it's very much about, and this was also revolutionary for the time. Her belief was that we don't access the divine as being somewhere up there, transcendent from us, outside of us, but that our beings, that our bodies are divine vessels of the divine, are sacred vessels of the divine. And so she created this, this action. I can't really show it here and to get the full effect, but it's got hand movements to it. You await wisdom, you allow it, you accept it, and then you attend to others in the world by sharing it with others. And it's very powerful. And I see that same kind of, when people get their body involved with it, it anchors whatever it is. I think Tony Robbins talks about that a lot. How do you anchor something? You move. You literally embody the concept, maybe a mental concept or an emotional one, in your body. And I see that so often. I led women's circles for, oh my gosh, a long time, over 20 years. And there is always a point in these circles that I get everybody up and moving, because that is yet another way to honor the divine feminine, to honor our bodies, to acknowledge that through our bodies we can access what's sacred, what's divine.
So you probably could help someone who has a kind of depressed posture when you're working with them or coaching them, and help them kind of open up.
Oh yeah.
One of the wonderful things about you is you do a lot of research and reading. You're not, and you also channel, I'm sure, in your own way, but you do spend a lot of time researching.
So that's my left brain. That's the, I think I'm a good balance, but yes, I love all this brain food.
So do you experience people who have resistance to what they would describe as, some would describe as woo-woo, when you talk about the mind-body connection? I'm not even sure the medical field necessarily altogether gets it yet.
Yeah, but they're getting there. I mean, these are conversations you could not have 5 years ago. I just see so much more awareness of that. Corporations are bringing in more mind, body, spirit stuff. And yes, as you said, that's kind of a buzz phrase. But I do think that and people generally, I feel like my website, and some PR person said this to me years ago, kind of funnels people out who aren't ready. And for me, part of my own spiritual practice is just taking people where they're at. I used to be very sensitive about, oh, they're going to think I'm too far out or I'm too woo-woo, and now it's just, okay, that's not where you're at. Maybe now or never, and that's okay. But the people that it resonates with are the people that find me. And I do find that, organizations are certainly more open-minded to that, the whole mind-body spirit conversation.
Certainly, organizations are re-examining the workspace because
Definitely.
there's a connection between the place you sit and where you are and how you perform.
Right.
So you're right about that. But as an interviewer, the best way I find the power of someone's work is when I ask them this question: how do you deal with your own experience of being down or lost? What's your practice when not the perfect is going on? Even the pandemic, for example.
Right. That is a great question, Phyllis. And I think I've often said my remedy is to hug anybody who's around, to hug, to cry. I'm a big believer in the power of crying, and to connect, to reach out, either talking with people, processing. I'm definitely a verbal processor, and writing has increasingly, for years, and I've never been a big journaler, interestingly enough. And I've written a couple books and love them. They're in ebook form at this point, but I've been doing a lot of writing lately, and I think I discovered actually during the 9/11, so back in 2001, what an outlet that was. And I'm sure I'm preaching to people who, anybody who understands it right, it can be a wonderful emotional outlet, knows what I'm talking about, and they may be ongoing journalers, but for me it's definitely it's connection, and it's getting outside. All during the pandemic, I made sure that I got outside every day, and with a mask, when it was the height of all the scary craziness, would find one of my trees. I'm a big tree person, and always isolated, nobody around, but would sit under my trees right across the street. And that connection, literally with my back up against a tree trunk, that so settles me. It's the first place I went years ago when my dad died. I walked over to, I live in New York City. I walked over to Central Park, and the willow tree is now gone, but there are other trees around that I've adopted. So nature, hugs, connecting with people, a good cry, all those things.
What about your self-talk? What do you invoke for yourself when you are dealing with something like that?
So I do believe in the power of words. I actually have been really exploring and training in positive intelligence, which is very much about how in those difficult times we shut down, we get triggered by the gremlins in our mind that try to tell us, that judge us and tell us that we're not good enough, or oh, you got to do what they say, otherwise they won't like you. The pleaser, that's one of my big saboteurs, is this this modality talks about, and that has the positive intelligence.
Go too fast beyond good stuff.
Okay.
What is the pleaser?
So this is the work of Shirzad Chamine. And he talks about the saboteurs that we all have. Everyone has them. Develop them as defense mechanisms in childhood, and it's time to keep them quiet. So the pleaser is my top one. There's a nice little assessment, very quick assessment you can do. And I could have told you I was a pleaser before I took any assessment about it. It means, and what I, when we were talking earlier about, what if people think of woo-woo? That drove me for so much of my early career. I mean, I was in the corporate for the first chunk of my career. When I got out of that and started exploring all of these alternative modalities, I started exploring the ancient symbol systems of astrology and tarot, even learned palmistry, which didn't stay with me in the same way. I loved the other ones though, and I still use them. I found myself, when people would ask me what I was doing, I would roll my eyes and I'd be very self-deprecating, and I'd call it the weird stuff, because God is forbid anybody would think that I was woo-woo, and they wouldn't take me seriously. They just dismiss me. And I've told this story many times. I think it was at one of our sons' end of soccer season potlucks. I was talking about what I did, and at that point I was researching feminist psychology and women's spirituality, and because I was working on my master's thesis, and I found myself talking about all of this woo-woo work as though it was the most natural thing in the world. And I noticed that, talking in a group of, I don't know, maybe 12 parents, we were all just having a conversation, that maybe a quarter of them, their eyes kind of glazed over and they faded away. Another quarter were curious, like, oh, that's interesting. I'd be interested to hear more about that. And the other were like, oh yeah, my sister just gave me a tarot deck for Christmas. And I found myself for the first time, the pleaser in me, not worrying about the ones that just faded away. It's like, okay, I'm not gonna be everybody's flavor.
That's fantastic. I'm just going to go back, because again, you're way ahead. You've got a lot of information in there.
Yes.
I just want to say that I was looking for, and perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, the pleaser is just a description of a mechanism that people use. A person who is not strong enough will do anything to please someone else other than themselves.
That's right.
So I just wanted to clarify what you meant by pleaser, because it seems to be a function of many women that we've been raised to be pleasing and not offensive in any way, and that we don't put ourselves first. But I like your story better that came out from that. So your pleaser has gone away for the most part.
Right. Well, there are definitely octaves there that, that rear, she rears her head. But then there's other ones too. There's the controller, which someone just needs to have control over everything around them to the point where they're strangling any creativity of anybody around them. Or the hyperachiever is another saboteur, which, I mean, any of these words you can just kind of imagine. Hypervigilant, you're always worried. Maybe you grew up in a war zone, and so you're always waiting for the next shoe to drop, or, the next catastrophe. And it's just fascinating. And what I love about the whole positive intelligence idea is that the mechanism for bringing you out of that, when you get hijacked by these saboteurs, to get you back into your sage brain, the essence of the best of you, is to do something that activates all your senses. So even rubbing your fingers together, just taking a moment, and just getting out of your head and into your body, being still for a minute and listening. What's the farthest away sound you can hear? What's the closest sound you can hear? Looking in your visual space. Look at the texture in the rug that's in front of you and really focus on that. Just thinking about ways that you can activate all your senses, and which is frankly a huge part of when I do ritual work, when I do wedding ceremonies. All of those, really powerful ritual comes from activating all your senses, because that gets you in your body and into your deepest self, which is where all change happens or starts anyway.
Well, you also have some very interesting work that you tie to individual historical figures or mythologically historical figures. So talk about this and the divine as you approach it. Let's just take one goddess that you're pulled towards and talk about that person or that historical image. I use the word history, but I don't know if these people existed. You know, Aphrodite, I don't know.
Exactly, right. You're right. I mean, we all think of Aphrodite and Venus as mythical people because that's who the Greeks and the Romans worshipped and all that. They were their gods and goddesses. So, but who knows? Who knows how many or any of these were originally real people? I recently did one on Asherah, the Semitic, but originally Canaanite goddess Asherah, who was pretty big. I mean, I had heard of her, but really dove into, just learning about. She was a fertility goddess. She because she was without going into the whole story, she birthed like 400 gods and goddesses, so she was clearly very fertile. But she was also a goddess, a mothering goddess of that, connected with kindness. And she, for whatever reason, she was always connected. She's represented by a tree, and another name for her was Tree of Life or Mother of Gods. And she was just a big deal in the Canaanite pantheon. And there's so much more to her. And I feel like I say that with all of these, mostly goddesses, some historical figures, some fictional ones. I actually did Queen Guinevere once.
Let's stay with Asherah because we don't have time for all of them. So how would knowing about this help someone?
Yes, that's a great question. And I always, when I post it, I put in what her themes are, what the goddess, what the figure is, what the themes are, and ask a question. Where's an area of your life that you feel like you become stagnant? You can call on Asherah when you need to grow something. Doesn't have to be, mothering energy is not just about giving birth to babies. It's giving birth to businesses, to books, to nurturing anything, ideas, dreams, anything to fruition. So, or if I'm highlighting a goddess that's about like Athena, the warrior goddess Athena, where do you need to be more powerful in your life? Where are you disempowering yourself? And what do you need to do? Who do you need to speak to? What support do you need to project your most powerful, inner warrior goddess out there in the world? So there's very specific questions that I ask, and also make sure that I let people know what the themes are so they can draw on whatever wisdom is resonating with them.
So I'm just thinking about someone who might be listening to say, who doesn't understand the world in which you are in. We are a monotheistic society. So are people threatened by the idea of calling forth deities from the past?
Right. They're all archetypes. It's just like we talk about a Peter Pan archetype as being someone who's perennially young. All the gods and goddesses, all this mythological stuff are all symbols. And as I always say, when I'm teaching about creating sacred space or creating sacred ritual, it all begins with symbols, and symbols are the language of the unconscious. So whether or not you believe in Athena's sword and shield, or that it's going to have any impact, there is the deepest part of us in our collective unconscious, as Jung would call it, our global unconscious. We were all dancing around fires and worshiping things, every single one of us, somewhere in our pre history. And so look at these as symbols. Even if you think there's just one God, even if you're monotheistic, open yourself up to the possibility that these are different aspects of your personality. Take them on as that they are, archetypes or representations of these different qualities that, each goddess represents. So I think there are certainly ways for people to enter into it that would be more comfortable, even if you're a monotheistic person.
Well, now I'm going to ask you about your favorite subjects. So you've been a remarkable mother with wonderful sons, but you have grandchildren now. So what have you noticed in the development of your grandchildren? Because they've come along as you've evolved in the work that you're in. So what are your observations about that?
Oh, I have to say, I am blown away by my son and daughter-in-law and all that they are exposing their daughter to. I mean, and she's pretty feisty. Her younger sister is learning her feistiness. She's about 1.5 years, well, more than that now, but has been pretty much clamped down because her older sister is so out there and always competing with her. And I think what I've noticed is that when you create the opening, especially, and hers is very much intellectual. She's super bright, which we're discovering. She's doing things that, of course, every grandparent says that, right? But she's curious about everything. And so I kind of draw on that curiosity and offer her things that are meaningful to me without cramming it down her throat, obviously. But watching her imagination. I mean, one of her favorite things to do is to leaf through this date book that I have that's all photographs, and we'll just flip and open to a photograph, and we'll take turns making up a story about the photograph, and watching her wheels go. Because when we first started doing this, and I used to do this with the boys, we used to play something called 3 words when they were little, where we just look around the room and say, tell me a story about a star, a flower, and a rug. And then we'd make up a story. I do that with my granddaughter with photographs. And she's gone from saying, once upon a time, there was a mountain with a lake next to it. And now she's learning, listening to me and getting more creative. She's watching her brain, just her little brain cells exploding. Is so much fun.
Well, you are the embodiment of what you offer, which is why this interview was so satisfying. I mean, there are lots of people who have theories about the moon and goddesses, etc. But you actually have a practice that gets you doing what it is you say you do. So I was curious about you and the grandchildren, but your story definitely proves the point. You pay attention to the divine energy in yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
And in others. Someone were to work with you, what could they expect? If they were to come to one of your circles or get coached by you, what would it feel like?
It really depends on what they're looking for, because I tailor obviously what I do. Not everybody comes to me and says, oh, I want to do divinely feminine coaching. I meet them where they're at. As I said, most people who come to me know that there will be some conversation about what role does spirit, whatever that means to you, how are you living a spirited life? They know that that'll be part of the conversation. They go to my website, they know all the woo-woo stuff I do. So, the couples that I work with, some of them, we don't touch any of that. I'll take them, they know that is there, but that may not be what they just want to be able to connect more deeply. The couples that I work with, for instance, that I do, couples coaching with, they want to be able to connect and deepen their relationship. Or obviously the couples that I work with to create wedding ceremonies with them are always, they come to me because, as they say, they want something spiritual, but not necessarily religious, something that represents the essence of who each of them are individually and who they are as a couple. And yeah, so there's many ways. It really depends if they're in transition, how do you move through transition with a deeper awareness of who you are, and making sure that whatever the next stage is in your life, whether it's a new career, whether it's whatever it is going to be something that represents the essence of who you are and what you really want and who you really are.
I thank you, Deborah. I thank you for your work. I thank you for your enthusiasm. And I will say that you also bring the fun into your work. Absolutely.
I call it
Is there a goddess for fun? Is there a goddess for fun? I guess there must be.
Oh, plenty of them. Bast is a good one. I call it sacred play. It really is.
So we may have to do a whole show just on the subject of sacred.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Deborah Roth.
It's been wonderful, Phyllis. Thank you.